So I've just listed out a few things that I think that I really learned, or we learned as a company from my experience, our experience of our US expansion. So I'm just going to kind of go through these briefly, and then it'd be great just to have more of a conversation about it. So the timing, I think it's interesting that we kind of, having had some success with RBR and Star, I think we were over eager to get into the US, and so we, as I said, we expanded in this entirely wrong way in 2001. And I think that the learning from that is that I think that you absolutely need to have product market fit in your own market before you start to think about any growth strategies, of which the US is probably the biggest growth opportunity that you could have. But I think you do have to have that foundation of product market fit. So you need to have a very clear value proposition. You need to understand exactly who your customer segment is, and you need to have pretty well worked pricing that you're using to sell into that customer segment. And I think once those three things are in place and aligned, I think that's what we would call product market fit. So once you've actually got a clear business within, you've got a representative group of customers within a clear customer segment who are paying you broadly what you want to be paid, which represents a good margin. So you've got that kind of product market fit, you've got that ability to, right now I know that if I scale, I can scale efficiently. If I invest in my go-to-market, if I invest in the US, I know that I can do that efficiently because I've got product market fit within my core market. So I think that that's important, and I think we started to establish that probably over 2001, 2002, and I think that really helped us with our strategy within the US when we decided to enter that market. I think also it's really good with the US to try and seed the market before you actually enter the market. So what I mean by that is there are often companies within the US who are connected to existing customers within the UK. So we were able to sell to a company called Air Products, who own British Gas, from the UK. They just happened to be really interested in what we were doing. British Gas was already a customer, so we had that kind of established relationship. And we were able to sell into Air Products from the UK and support them from the UK because they were kind of an early adopter and they believed in what we were doing. And then, then even more importantly, we were able to sell into a part of the Federal Reserve before we moved to the US as well. So the Bank of England was a big customer of ours in the UK, and all the central banks talk to each other, and there's a big annual meeting where they all present what they're doing in IT, and the Bank of England presented message ads and how it protected them from email viruses. So the Federal Reserve, again, showed that they wanted to be an early adopter. They signed up as a customer before we were in the US as well. So we had they were the two big names that I can think of, but we had a handful of names who were prepared, for whatever reason, to be early adopters, who were prepared to sign with us and be supported by us before we had any presence in the US. And I think that's a really good way to kind of seed the market and get a sense that the market's going to be similarly responsive to your value proposition, and that you've kind of established some customers remotely. Because there are certain customers, for whatever reason, that are prepared to be early adopters, and they are prepared to take a risk with you before you even have a presence in the US. And I think that really helped us in terms of then having a foundation that we could then build on. So I think having done that, once you've actually got product market fit in your home market, once you've seeded the new market, seeded the US with some early customers, I think you can then really build out a fully formed plan. I think that plan does have to be more than just for the US anyway, it has to be more than just a sales satellite kind of operation. You know, the US is a big market, it's a demanding market. I don't think you necessarily have to get into the operational side or product development, but I think they want to know that there's going to be more than just salespeople in the market. They want to know that there's going to be customer support teams in the market. They want to know that there's going to be marketing, that there's going to be product marketing and product teams that are feeding requirements back from the US market back into your core engineering and product team, which will probably still remain in the UK. But I think that you need to build a plan which certainly is fairly well-rounded in terms of the customer-facing elements of what you're doing. So sales, marketing, product, customer success. I think they're really all important elements of establishing a credible organization in the US. Because I think if you're saying, well, we're just gonna set up a sales team and we're going to support everything else from the UK, that might work for a US company coming to a smaller market, but from, the UK is a very, very small market, it doesn't have the same credibility as the US. So I think you need to make that kind of commitment and you need to build a plan which reflects that. So it is a big commitment financially and in terms of time and everything else. So I think in terms of your brand, I think moving to the US is definitely an opportunity to refresh your brand and refresh your messaging. You want to talk, an example of this is we started to, we're in our original boilerplate, we had this very parochial kind of Message Ads is a Gloucester-based company in the UK. And we still had that, like having been in the US market for 7 months, I'm reading it, what are we talking about? I mean, that is going to completely put off any US customer. So we refreshed that message to be, Message Ads is the world leader in cloud-based email security with our US headquarters in New York and our European headquarters in London. And I think examples like that, I think there's a lot that you can do to position yourselves as more of a global company, to position yourselves as a company with the US very much at the center. And so I think there's an opportunity to kind of look at your brand and all kind of elements of it, but particularly the messaging, and just take it up a level and make sure that you're talking, you don't have to completely lose touch with your roots, but you're talking a bigger language and you're talking about the company being more global. You're talking about the US as a key location, or even as, you have your US headquarters, wherever it is. And just to make sure that your messaging, your brand fits with the US market, because you'd be surprised that once you get into the US market for a few months and then you look back on all the different elements of your brand, and you'll quickly see certain things which are just going to really make your life more difficult in the US market. Because US buyers, ideally they want to buy from a US company. And if they're not buying from a US company, they want to at least feel that you're making a big, big commitment to the US market, and that you're positioning yourselves as a kind of global company, but with the US very much at its sort of center. So I think there's an opportunity to really to look closely at that. And then advisors, I think in your home market, and I think we probably take this for granted, but in your home market, we all have people that we can turn to and we can get advice from, and you build those up over time. But when you enter a new market, you don't necessarily have that. You don't necessarily have that time, because you need the advice early on as you're building out the organization. So I think to really take the time, and whether this is at a formal level, where you actually give them share options, or you structure it so there's a meeting every month or every quarter, or it's just an informal level of, you have a group of people and, they just enjoy being a mentor and enjoy providing support because maybe, they received a similar level of support themselves from someone, so they just want to kind of give back. But there are different ways of doing it. But I think to have just a small number of advisors covering each of the important elements of a US expansion. So maybe a European founder who's taken his business to the US and been successful, but also someone who's maybe US based on the go-to-market side, someone who's US based on the product and the tech side, maybe someone on the finance side, but to have 3 or 4 people, however you do it, just buy them dinner every month or however you decide to do it, but people that you really feel that you can call on, that have the subject matter expertise in the US market. And I think that will really help you make decisions and help you kind of navigate some of the challenges that you have, because you get out there with your suitcase and you feel very exposed, you feel very isolated. You think you can talk to people back in the UK, and you can, but it's not the same, and they haven't been through, it's a different market. So I think to really invest time in putting together that little group of people, I think can really help the whole the whole move into the market. So I would say that we didn't do that very well. I think that on the timing, the second time we did it okay. I think the New York worked reasonably well. I think it took us too long to figure out some of the brand stuff. I think after maybe a year or two, I think we had the brand right and more sort of focused on the US market, but it took us too long. But I don't think, looking back on it, I wish that I'd taken more time. I think I was sort of typical, like, oh, I'll just get on with it, and I'm sure we'll figure it out. But I wish that I'd actually taken more time and had a more kind of group of people that I could really trust and call on. And then the culture point, my experience is that that the US market is a huge opportunity, but at the same time, it's more demanding than any other market in the world, and it's more competitive than any other market in the world. And that to be successful there, I think the whole organization needs to step up and increase its work rate and just increase the way that it supports other markets, and just everything that it does, I think, needs to move up a gear. My experience in the UK, particularly on the product and engineering side, but maybe in some other functions as well, but certainly within MessageAds, on the product and engineering side, we did not have a just get it done, just do whatever it takes kind of culture. It was all a little bit, well, it says in our contract that we work from 8 till 6, so we'll work from 8 till 6, and everybody kind of disappeared at 6. And I think that's more, I think it's starting to change a little bit, but I think that the culture in Europe is a little bit different. And people might work hard, you've got very, very talented people, but I think they're a little bit more confined by no one looks at their contract in the US. People just get stuff done, and it just doesn't matter. They're motivated, and there's a different culture, and it's just kind of accepted that you're always on, and you'll do what it takes. And it kind of helps that the employment law in the US is very much in the favour of the employer, which is a little bit different here. Don't want to get into that, but there is I think generally some differences in the culture. So I think you can take some of those learnings from the US in terms of how your competition is moving really quickly, how the demands that you're getting from customers, just seeing the kind of competitive dynamics in the US market, because it does feel different. And I think you can take that back to the central organisation in the UK and say, look guys, I need your support here, because if we're going to build a big global company, we need to be competitive in the US, and right now we're not competitive in the US, and this is why. And to try and use it as a reason, or as a kind of launch pad, I guess, to really just for the whole organisation to step up. Because in my experience, if it doesn't, I think, especially as they're supporting you remotely anyway, so it's a challenge before you've even got into the kind of cultural aspects and who's kind of working harder. But I think you can use it as a kind of rallying cry, particularly if you can cite specific examples of, Pustini, they built this new feature that we've been working on for months, and I really need it, you need to support me. And I just think you can get people on side if you explain the different dynamics of the US market, but also the opportunity, because if you get out into the US, you don't necessarily have to be the number one in the US, but I think you have to be competitive out there. And if you are, that is a huge step towards building a big, valuable global company. And the flip side of that is, I think if you're not competitive in the US, eventually your US competitors will just roll you over, because that is the most market-tested market. It's like training at altitude in the US. So once those companies start expanding into other markets, and you haven't got out there, and you haven't experienced it, you haven't learned how to be competitive yourselves, I think long term, I think it's it will lead to problems.
The difference between the East and West cultures, do you think there's a difference there at all?
I think a little bit, yeah. I think that the Valley has that really unique culture of just getting it done. It does help that there's a lot more companies that are really, really valuable, and so all those engineers are holding stock options that are proportionately very, very valuable. So it is, there is a certain amount of that the more successful companies, the more valuable the share options are, the harder the people work, creates more successful. So there is a certain amount of that sort of virtuous circle. But I think even outside of that, I think the culture is different. And I think New York and Boston, which are the two other big tech hubs, are similar. So I think they're somewhere in between. But I think they're better than they are here. I mean, I think everybody's starting to learn that the culture needs to be, if you're really going to compete and build a big, valuable business, that the culture needs to change. I think, people are starting to learn that here. But, culture, in my experience, is something that is difficult to change. It takes a long time. But, you can certainly use the US expansion as a kind of trigger point to try to tell this story that maybe will inspire people to change, because you think, if look at this opportunity, but if we're really going to take advantage of it, these are the things that are holding us back. So I think you can use it not just to build a different culture in the US, but you can use it to change culture across the whole organization. So it's, in some ways it's kind of an opportunity. So I think that was it.
We call it culture because we see that, and then you go to, you can talk about it, you see the opportunity, but still you have people that are just sluggish adopting it. But
Yeah.
we see, we're just trying to get everybody, even in product or in marketing or in support, to get them over to the US, because the moment you land in the US, there is a different vibe.
Yeah.
And they come back and start infiltrating the whole team again, and they see there's more urgency coming. But you have to keep that going, because after 2-3 weeks, it settles back again.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and actually maybe eventually having some US people, moving in the other direction, moving to the UK, sort of mixing it up a bit. I just remembered one other really important part of the brand, which I didn't mention, is on the subject of third-party endorsement. So I think it takes time. My experience is it takes time to build a brand. I mean, I ran Marketing Message App, so it was my responsibility to build our brand. And I think that one of the best ways to build a brand, particularly when you're new to a market, so people think, who the hell's Message Apps, a company from the UK, is you build the brand through third-party endorsement. And so you're building the brand through people. They may not be familiar with you, but if you can get big customers, big partners, well-established journalists, and analysts as well. So they're the 4 key groups: customers, partners, media, analysts. And I think it's important I think third-party endorsement is important for a brand in any market, but I think it is particularly for a new market where your brand itself is not so established. So if you can get US-facing credible names supporting your brand, saying good things about your brand, I think it can give you a real kind of acceleration in the market. And I think we did a pretty good job of that, in that we had people at the Federal Reserve. We used to say that, when prospects would say, you just seem like a small company, how can we trust you? And we had the British government and we had the Federal Reserve, so we used to say that, we scanned Tony Blair's and Alan Greenspan's email, which was true, which was pretty cool. So we said, I think you can trust us, and that Federal Reserve talking about us, being able to say things like that was really, really important. And then we signed a partnership with IBM. So IBM, and they actually never sold all that much of Message App's services, but to be able to say that we're working with IBM in the early stages, and that third-party endorsement is really valuable in the early stages. Media side, we found quite difficult, because I think it's just a very competitive market, but we did, when there was a virus outbreak, we really knew what was going on more than anybody else. So we had this sub-brand called Message Apps Intelligence. So we could actually say, here's the top 10 viruses at any one time. Here are the biggest senders of viruses, which was always China and then Russia. But we had this kind of live information. So we were able, when there was a big virus outbreak, and then in the 2000s, there were several major outbreaks. So we were able to kind of leverage that in the media. I was on TV quite a lot talking about the outbreak, because we could literally see, we've seen 3.5 million copies of this. We could see the hour by hour distribution, which countries it was coming from. So we had all this information, which kind of really helped us in the media. And then the analyst relations is really, the US puts a lot of value on analyst relations. So we got our place as a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for email security. Not straight away, but I think after about 2 years, probably 2004, 2005, and we had to work really hard to do that, because even though we were the biggest company in our market, any non-US traction gets massively discounted. That's completely unfair, but they'll slightly just dismiss it and say, yeah, but what's your US revenue? And we almost had to submit a report purely for the US business. But getting into the Gartner Magic Quadrant, really, I mean, I used to meet the main analysts at Gartner regularly, Forrester and others. It all supports that whole third-party endorsement thing, which I think is important generally for a brand, but I think it's particularly important for a new market and for the US. I think it's